Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Pamela had always believed that if a man spoke with a soft voice and a clean shirt, he was likely to be harmless. That's how Jerome had first slipped past the wall she kept around her heart, like a careful mason guarding his last bag of cement. He was gentle, polite, the kind of man who said please when asking for a kiss and still opened car doors like it was a commandment from heaven. They met under the whirring blades of an old ceiling fan in the HR office of a struggling hotel where she worked reception. He wasn't loud like the others or dripping with cologne and lies. He came with silence, calculated, charming silence, and that was what disarmed her. His first compliment wasn't about her shape or how her lips looked in nude lipstick. It was about her calm, the way she held chaos without spilling it. He told her his name was Jerome, and that his marriage had become a house where only shadows lived. She didn't answer at first, but her eyes softened. That's how it started. Not with fire, but with a small flicker under dry leaves. Their first meeting was innocent enough, a shared plate of small chops at the staff conference. Their second happened under rain, with a broken umbrella and his hand brushing hers as they ran for cover. And by the third, she was already hearing her neighbors say things like, "This your glow gets so." Yet the thing about borrowed brightness is that it dims the moment the real owner wants his lamp back. The affair had no label, just a rhythm. He would show up on Thursdays, leave on Sundays, and send her urgent "I miss you" texts by Tuesday morning. It was the kind of love that walked with slippers in the hallway and left traces of cologne on pillowcases. She told herself she wasn't like other girls, that she had not fallen, only leaned. But love, no matter how softly it creeps in, always carries a matchbox. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night and scroll through their messages, rereading his voice notes where he whispered how she was the peace he prayed for, but never found in his house. He painted his wife as a woman made of stone, rigid, uninterested, a woman who folded her arms in bed like a market woman protecting her change. Pamela believed him, not because she was naive, but because his lies were wrapped in exhaustion. He didn't sound wicked, he sounded tired, like a man searching for a soft landing. She saw herself as a temporary balm, a shoulder he needed before finding his way back to joy. But slowly, she began to notice cracks in the stories. One day, she found an old birthday card in his car's glove compartment. It was addressed to Melanie, with careful handwriting, a lipstick kiss on the corner, and the words, "To my crown, with love." That same week, Jerome had told her Melanie hadn't smiled at him in 5 years. Pamela didn't confront him. Instead, she watched how his voice changed when his phone rang at night, how he left the room to take calls and returned with vague stories about clients. She began to piece together things like a seamstress assembling mismatched fabric. The final thread snapped when Jerome accidentally left his second phone at her apartment one humid Saturday afternoon. It was carelessness, not fate, that delivered the device into her hands. And in that phone lived 1,000 truths he had buried beneath laughter and forehead kisses. The messages weren't sweet nothings or flirtations with other women. They were cold reminders from banks, notes from school administrators, and desperate voice messages from his wife, asking for transport fare, begging for NEPA bills to be paid, even pleading for medication for their daughter who had bronchitis. Each message was a pin through Pamela's ribs. She had been living like the first lady of an illusion, while the real queen was busy boiling water for paracetamol and explaining to their child why daddy hadn't sent money. It wasn't just betrayal that stung her. It was the knowledge that she had unknowingly danced on another woman's tears. The guilt was immediate, like sour milk on a fresh tongue. That night, she didn't sleep. Her ceiling fan spun like it was counting every mistake she had made in silence. She decided to return the phone the next morning, not out of kindness, but clarity. She was done. No explanations, no confrontations. Just a quiet goodbye. But as she slipped the phone into her bag, something made her pause. She scrolled again, slower this time, reading the timestamps, watching the pleading unfold like a broken hymn. One message stood out. It was Melanie's voice, trembling, saying, "If you can't love me, at least take care of your child. You said you loved her once." Pamela played that message 3 times, then 4. Each replay felt like a hammer on her chest. She looked around her apartment, suddenly feeling like a thief in someone else's house. Everything Jerome had ever bought her, curtains, blender, even the throw pillow that read "Love Lives Here," felt tainted. Her conscience didn't burn, it ached. That was the difference. Burning passes quickly. Aching lingers. Later that day, she visited Melanie's boutique. She didn't walk in. She just stood across the road and watched. A woman in a faded wrapper was sweeping the entrance. That was her. Melanie. The woman who had become a ghost in Jerome's stories. She was younger than Pamela imagined, but her back was tired. You could tell from the way she leaned into the broom, like life had bent her spine one disappointment at a time. Pamela didn't approach. Not yet. But she went home that day with a question that refused to die. What if they weren't enemies? What if they were both victims of the same well-dressed lie? The next morning came quietly, but not without weight. Pamela sat by her window, staring at the swaying neem tree outside like it might offer her counsel. The guilt had not loosened its grip. In fact, it had nested inside her chest, growing roots. For the first time since the affair began, she didn't look at her phone first thing. Jerome had sent 2 messages and a voice note. She didn't open any. Instead, she brewed a pot of black tea and sipped it slowly, the way elders say you should when your spirit is unsettled. Her stomach turned as she remembered Melanie's voice from the recording. There was something in the woman's tone that haunted her, like the cry of someone who had grown tired of crying. That afternoon, Pamela returned to Melanie's boutique, not out of curiosity this time, but conviction. She told herself she'd just peek again, perhaps gather the courage to speak, or maybe slip a note into the woman's hand. But when she got there, Melanie was inside, seated on a low stool behind a rack of Ankara skirts, her eyes locked on her phone like it held news that might unmake her. There was no one else in the shop. It was one of those hot days when even flies got lazy and the ceiling fan turned as though dragging the air by the neck. Pamela stepped in. Her feet were hesitant, like someone walking into church after years of sin. Melanie looked up slowly. Their eyes met and held. "Can I help you?" Melanie's voice was gentle, but it carried the caution of a woman who had met betrayal too many times to greet strangers with ease. Pamela almost walked out. Her lips parted, but her words tangled in her throat, like a necklace forgotten in a drawer too long. She swallowed and took a breath so deep it made her shoulders tremble. "My name is Pamela," she began, the sound of her own voice unfamiliar. I know Jerome." That was all she said. The room went still, like even the mannequins had stopped listening. Melanie didn't flinch. Her face didn't twist. She only blinked, then slowly stood up. The space between them was wide, not just physically, but emotionally. 2 women separated by the choices of one man. "I see," Melanie said, her voice low. "So what do you want from me?" Pamela shook her head, tears already pricking her eyes. "Nothing. I just wanted to tell you that I didn't know. Not really. Not like this. And I'm sorry." She pulled out the phone from her bag, the one Jerome had left, and handed it over. "I thought you deserved to know what's in here." Melanie didn't touch it. She simply looked at it, then at Pamela. "You were with him," she said, "and now you're here with me. That means something broke, doesn't it?" Pamela nodded. "It broke the moment I realized he wasn't just lying to you. He was lying to me, too." They sat in silence for what felt like hours. Melanie eventually offered Pamela a chair, then poured her a glass of warm malt from a half-empty bottle she'd opened earlier. It was the strangest communion. Two women sipping the same drink while trying to untangle the web of a man who had played them both. Melanie finally picked up the phone, scrolled through the messages, played the voice notes, and read the transaction alerts. Her hands didn't shake. Her lips didn't move. But Pamela saw the storm brewing behind her eyes, like clouds stacking above a quiet village before heavy rain. "You said you didn't know," Melanie said at last, her voice even. "I believe you." "But you stayed after the first lie, didn't you?" Pamela looked down. "I thought I was helping him. I thought he was broken and just needed to be loved differently." Melanie gave a soft, bitter laugh. "You women always think that you're the answer to a man who lost his compass. But sometimes the compass is working. He just doesn't want to go home." There was no venom in her tone, only experience. Pamela sat still, absorbing every word like a child being taught a lesson her mother never mentioned. Melanie continued, "Do you know how many times I begged him to help? Not for me, for the children. He would promise, vanish, then show up with cologne and guilt kisses." Pamela shook her head slowly. "He told me you were cold, that you didn't touch him, that the marriage was dead." Melanie smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's easy to call something dead when you're the one killing it. That evening, as dusk painted the sky with fading orange strokes, Pamela offered to leave. She had done what she came for, and her heart was already carrying more than it could hold. But Melanie stopped her at the door. "Wait," she said, her voice quiet. "I need you to do something for me." Pamela turned, unsure what to expect. "I want you to keep seeing him," Melanie said, her eyes locking onto hers. "Not because I want to keep the lie alive, but because I need to know how deep this hole goes." Pamela blinked in confusion. "You want me to stay with him?" Melanie nodded. "He trusts you. He tells you things he thinks I don't deserve to hear. Let him keep talking. While you listen, I'll be watching. I need to know where our money is going, what he's planning, who he thinks he's fooling. I've spent years being the fool in silence. That silence ends now." Pamela hesitated. This wasn't what she came for. She wanted closure, not collaboration. But something in Melanie's voice, a thread of weary strength, held her in place. Pamela sighed. "Okay. But if I'm going to do this, it won't be halfway. You'll need to teach me how to notice things. Things I've been too blind to see." Melanie smiled then, a small, tight curve of her lips. "You'd be surprised what a woman can learn when she stops believing fairy tales." And just like that, a strange alliance began, born not from friendship, but from shared betrayal. The kind of bond only pain could weld together. Pamela's days began to stretch like chewing gum, long, sticky, and unsure of when it would finally snap. Her new role as a bridge between Melanie and Jerome sat on her shoulders like a wet blanket, heavy and cold. She didn't feel like a spy. She felt like a woman wading waist-deep through a river of shame, one that didn't rush or roar, but crept in quietly with every step. Jerome, blissfully unaware, continued to play his game with practiced ease. He brought groceries, sent airtime like love letters, and smiled that same tired smile as if trying to mask the fraying rope beneath his charm. Each time he leaned close and said things like, "I wish I'd met you first," Pamela fought the urge to flinch. She had learned from Melanie how to keep her face still, how to nod without swallowing the lie, how to listen without agreeing. It was like wearing a mask made of her own skin. On a particularly hot afternoon, Jerome suggested they start a poultry business together. "You have brains," he told her, "and I have capital. Let's build something small, side income, just us." He made it sound sweet, like a shared secret between lovers, but Pamela's eyes drifted to the envelope in his hand, a folder Melanie had warned her about, filled with money from a recently sold plot of land. "Just us," he repeated. But even the flies in the room seemed to know that just us never really meant what it should. She returned to Melanie that evening, her heart thumping like a thief's footsteps in a silent room. They sat in the kitchen this time, where the scent of fried okra lingered like memory. Melanie took the folder from her hand and opened it without a word. Her eyes scanned the papers quickly, calculating, her mind ticking like a lawyer before a verdict. Pamela watched her, marveling at how a woman so wrong could still carry herself like royalty. There was something about Melanie's composure that wrapped the room in quiet authority. "He sold the land," Melanie finally said, flipping through the last document. "The one my father gave us before he passed. Said we'd use it to build a house in our hometown." Her voice didn't tremble. It floated, steady as a canoe on still water. "And now he wants to build poultry with you." "Romantic," she added, her mouth twitching with bitter humor. Pamela looked down. "I didn't say yes." Melanie nodded slowly. "You don't need to. He will come back again with bigger promises. That's how he operates." "Jerome is not building a future. He's buying peace from every woman he's failing." Pamela bit her lower lip. "What do we do?" Melanie leaned forward. "We let him dig. Men like him don't fall into pits. They build them and lie inside, hoping no one notices. But while he's digging, we take the shovel away quietly." The plan was no longer a whisper. It was taking form, like the first outline of a painting on blank canvas. They would need details, account numbers, schedules, names of agents, buyers, everything. Melanie would prepare legal steps. Pamela would distract him. Their revenge wasn't loud. It was papered, stamped, and slow, like medicine that tastes sweet before it burns your throat. Over the next few weeks, Pamela danced between two truths like a tightrope walker with no net. With Jerome, she played her part with the skill of an actress who had finally learned not to flinch during the close-up. She asked the right questions, feigned curiosity, took mental notes, and kept receipts, both literal and emotional. With Melanie, she passed the information like breadcrumbs, each one leading them closer to the core of his empire. Melanie, in turn, reached out to an old lawyer friend who once helped her register her boutique. The woman, Nina, sharp as broken glass, listened to their story with an arched brow and said, "If this man had invested half the effort he used in hiding assets into loving his wife, we wouldn't be here." Together, they started tracing the paper trail. Unknown to Jerome, Melanie was still listed as a joint signatory on one dormant account. She used that leverage like a skilled chess player holding onto a knight while her opponent danced around with pawns. She quietly filed to unfreeze it, and from there, the doors began to open. Land documents were uncovered, sales figures revealed, and a list of side businesses Jerome had registered under fictitious names began to fall into place. Pamela began photographing receipts after every date, drinks, transfers, even text messages where Jerome bragged about hiding cash under a different bank profile. She felt like a mole in the middle of an earthquake, recording tremors before the building came crashing down. One night, as the sky rumbled with a thunderstorm that left the streetlights blinking like dying candles, Jerome came over, tipsy and sentimental. "I've been thinking," he slurred, placing his head on Pamela's lap, "maybe I'll finally leave that house. Just you and me. We can start fresh." Pamela's fingers froze mid-stroke through his hair. Her mouth said nothing, but her thoughts screamed. Leave Melanie? The same woman he still owed 4 months of electricity bills? The same woman whose name he used to collect a cooperative loan? The audacity hung in the air like soap laundry, shameless, heavy, and dripping nonsense. "Don't you think we need a clean slate?" he continued. "Let me find a buyer for that other property in Ellicott. Once that goes through, we'll have enough to relocate, maybe even open a bigger shop for you." Pamela nodded absently, pretending to dream along. But deep down, her heart was documenting every word like a spy transcribing a confession. Later, she typed out everything he said in a note on her phone, then emailed it to Melanie and Nina. They were almost there. The net was tightening. And Jerome, in his arrogance, didn't notice. He was too busy dressing his betrayal in promises and spraying it with perfume. He thought he was the puppeteer, but the strings were slowly slipping from his hands. Pamela felt a strange sense of purpose, a quiet fire growing inside her. She hadn't set out to destroy him. She only wanted the truth. But now that she had it, she wouldn't let it die quietly in a folder or memory. It had to speak. It had to echo. And soon it would. The tension between deceit and discovery was beginning to form a language of its own, one that Pamela could now speak fluently without ever moving her lips. Jerome, still thick in his illusion of control, had begun spending more nights at her apartment, tossing business ideas around like confetti at a wedding. Each new visit came with a louder promise, like a street preacher shouting for converts. He talked about starting a laundry business in the city center, expanding his fake poultry proposal, and even hinted at offshore savings. But all the while, Pamela knew his hand was in too many baskets, some woven by other women, some stitched with lies. Every new fantasy he fed her was sent directly to Melanie and Nina, who by now had filed a petition through legal back channels to recover misappropriated funds from one of the dormant accounts. Jerome's arrogance made their work easier. He didn't change passwords, didn't suspect Pamela, didn't think a woman who once blushed under his touch could bite back. He would sometimes sleep with his head on her lap and talk in his sleep, naming people, deals, amounts, and she would note them all, like a banker writing minutes. There was one night he mumbled something about the safe in Chinda's workshop, and Pamela, without blinking, typed it down. She had become an archivist of betrayal, storing every word like ammunition. But her heart wasn't fully made of stone. Sometimes she would retreat to the bathroom, lean against the cold tiles, and let the tears run silently. Not because she missed him, but because it hurt to admit she ever believed him in the first place. Melanie had changed too. Not into someone bitter or broken, but into a woman who had dusted herself off and decided to walk barefoot across the fire if that's what it took. Her face carried a new kind of calm, not the weak kind that accepts sorrow, but the dangerous kind that waits in silence and strikes with precision. She had stopped crying about Jerome. That chapter was closed, sealed, and set on fire. Now her eyes stayed sharp, and her voice cut clean, like a knife slicing yam for evening soup. Every week she met with Nina in a corner office near the city courthouse, collecting paperwork, processing injunctions, and quietly building the legal storm that Jerome never saw coming. At the boutique, her staff noticed the difference. She started showing up early, her headscarves more vibrant, her laughter more real. But no one knew the woman who had once begged for school fees now carried legal documents in her handbag and kept a flash drive of her husband's secrets beneath her wrapper. One evening, as she sat by the back steps of the boutique with Pamela, watching the sun bleed into the soil, Melanie said, "He thought love was a leash. But you and we've become fire." Pamela didn't reply immediately. She only looked ahead, watching a dog chase a chicken across the street. "Do you think he ever loved you?" she asked quietly. Melanie scoffed. "Love," she repeated. "Love is patient, not pitiful. He didn't love me. He pitied me, then punished me for needing him." That line stayed with Pamela for days. How a man could punish you for what he once promised to give freely. The first major blow came when Jerome's bank blocked a transaction he had scheduled for a down payment on a new plot in Ellicott. He stormed into the bank that morning, red-eyed and sweating like a trader whose goods had just sunk in the river. Pamela was waiting outside in the car, pretending not to know what was happening while texting updates to Melanie. Inside the bank, the branch manager calmly explained that a freeze had been placed on all joint marital accounts pending legal resolution, and that further actions would require the consent of both parties. Jerome was livid. He demanded to know who filed it. But the manager, well-trained and diplomatically firm, simply referred him to the letter from the court. "You can sort it out with your wife, sir," the man had said, almost with a shrug. Jerome stumbled out of the bank, fuming, dialed Melanie, and launched into a tirade, but she didn't raise her voice. Instead, she said, "I'm not your wife. I'm your consequence." Then she hung up. That sentence clapped in Jerome's ears all day like a generator that refused to start, noisy and humiliating. He returned to Pamela's place that night unusually quiet, pacing the floor, biting his thumbnail, muttering about betrayal and witches. Pamela, wrapped in a simple chiffon robe, handed him warm water and acted confused. "Maybe it's a mistake," she whispered, gently patting his shoulder. But inside, her soul was clapping. She messaged Melanie under the blanket later that night. "Stage 1 done. He's shaken. He won't sleep well tonight." Melanie replied with a single word, "Good." But what truly began to unmake Jerome wasn't the bank or the lawyer. It was the sudden collapse of his image. Word started spreading in corners of Romualma that he owed 2 suppliers, had bounced a check at a local car dealership, and recently lost favor with a cooperative he once bragged about. Even his barber noticed he was growing gray and quiet, coming in less frequently and tipping less generously. Jerome, who once moved like a peacock in a field of pigeons, now walked like a man dodging shadows. Pamela kept close, never letting her mask slip. He confided more, told her about his fears, asked her if she would still stay even if he lost everything. "Will you still love me when I'm not king?" he whispered once, his voice smaller than she had ever heard it. Pamela looked him dead in the eye and kissed his forehead. "Kings rise again," she said, masking the acid in her mouth. But deep inside, she knew this particular throne had termites in its legs, and soon it would break beneath him. Melanie, on her end, had already notified tenants on one of their properties of a new landlady. She served Jerome a legal notice of asset reassignment with receipts attached. He received it at work, in front of colleagues, and that was the day his smile broke. The cracks were no longer invisible. Pamela saw it that evening when he returned, his laugh missing, his shoulders slumped. He asked for rice but didn't eat it. He said he was fine but didn't sleep. For the first time, she saw not the man who once charmed her, but the boy inside him who had never been told that lies eventually starve their owners. And just like that, the man who thought he had 2 women wrapped around his fingers began to watch both hands slowly disappear. By the time Jerome stood in the middle of his living room and began tearing through drawers like a man searching for air, Pamela knew the final curtain was close. It wasn't just the bounced transactions or the subtle shift in how people now greeted him. Less respect, more curiosity, like they were watching a balloon slowly lose air. It was the way he had begun to talk to himself. Not out loud, but under his breath, like a man whispering to ghosts only he could see. That morning, he'd received an email from a construction company demanding compensation for a canceled land development contract. Melanie had officially pulled her name from the documents, making the deal void. Pamela found him pacing, shirt half-buttoned, muttering numbers, threats, and names of people he claimed had sabotaged him. "Somebody is working against me," he kept saying over and over, like a scratched CD repeating its most desperate line. But there was no chorus, only silence. She watched him closely as he grabbed his phone, tried to call Melanie, then stopped halfway. It was the first time she'd seen him unsure, this man who once bragged about having every situation under his thumb. His hands trembled slightly when he dialed Chinda, his friend and fake business partner. The call didn't go through. The second time, the line was busy. By the third time, he didn't bother. Instead, he dropped into a chair and stared into space, a man sitting in the ruins of his own confidence. Pamela offered him a cup of tea, and as he took it, she noticed the way his fingers curled tightly around the mug. Fear had a grip on him now, and it wasn't letting go. That evening, Melanie was waiting with Nina inside a dim-lit restaurant in Alico Plaza. The folder on the table in front of them held copies of everything they needed: bank statements, signed property deeds, lawyer letters, even a document Jerome had foolishly notarized under Melanie's name back when trust still lived in their home. When Pamela arrived, she sat down quietly and slid Jerome's notebook across the table, a black leather journal he carried everywhere, filled with scribbles, calculations, and names of side women and ghost businesses. Melanie opened it slowly and flipped through the pages, stopping at one that read, Pam, safe bet, loyal, might move in soon. The irony sliced through the air like a blade. Pamela didn't speak, but her eyes narrowed as she looked away, the humiliation tightening her throat. Melanie didn't gloat. She simply shut the book and placed her palm on it. This is enough, she said. We'll strike tomorrow. Nina nodded, adjusting her glasses. Do you want to press criminal charges or just recover assets? Melanie leaned back, sighing. I want everything he built with my sweat, everything he thought I wouldn't notice. But I don't want his name dragged in the mud. That would make him a martyr in some people's eyes. No, I want him walking around, still wearing nice shirts, but empty. Let him live long enough to see what it means to build a house of cards in a storm. Pamela clenched her jaw, her fingers locked together on the table. He said he loved me, she whispered, but it was never love. I was just a soft landing between his failures. Nina looked at both women and smiled grimly. By tomorrow evening, his phone will stop ringing, not because the network failed, but because people only answer when you have something to offer. The plan unfolded the next day like a silent explosion. Melanie had served Jerome a legal freeze on one more property, the one he'd used as collateral for a secret loan with a local finance cooperative. The timing was surgical. It happened just before he was meant to collect a disbursement that would have helped him cover 2 pending payments. The cooperative called him at lunchtime, and by the time he returned from the meeting, his voice was hoarse from yelling. He accused the heir, cursed invisible enemies, and punched the dashboard of his car like it would spit out solutions. Pamela, dressed in a soft yellow blouse that day, acted shocked when he told her. But you said all your documents were clean, she murmured. Why would they stop your money? Jerome shook his head violently. It's Melanie. That woman is behind this. She's gone mad. Pamela forced a small, hesitant voice. Do you want me to talk to her? Jerome barked. What for? She's not your business. She's jealous because I'm trying to be happy. That sentence hung in the air like smoke from bad incense, offensive and bitter. Later that night, he begged her to stay the weekend, promising to transfer part of the money he still had left to her account. He made her sit beside him while he processed the transaction through his banking app. What he didn't know was that the account he was trying to use had already been flagged. The transfer failed. Twice. The third time, he threw the phone on the floor. Pamela picked it up, calm as ever, dusted it, and handed it back. Maybe it's a glitch, she said softly. But the truth was clicking into place in Jerome's head like a zipper closing on his ego. Slowly, painfully, he was realizing he'd been robbed, but not by thieves. By truth, disguised as quiet women. The following morning was the crescendo. Pamela had already alerted Melanie of the perfect time. Jerome would be home late in the morning, trying to make fresh calls and figure out who was betraying him. Pamela arrived first, holding the folder Melanie had signed off on, a final asset reassignment, complete with affidavits and official stamps. When Melanie walked in 10 minutes later, dressed in a soft green gown with quiet strength etched into every line on her face, Jerome looked up like he'd seen a ghost walk in with receipts. "What is this?" he croaked. "You two? Are you mad?" His voice cracked at the edges, but neither woman flinched. Melanie stepped forward and placed the papers on the table. "This," she said, "is the story you wrote behind our backs. We just read it aloud." Pamela sat down calmly, opened the folder, and took out a page. "Your signatures," she said, "from your own notebook. You don't lie well in ink." Jerome looked from one woman to the other, his mouth opening, then closing again like a faulty tap. "You think this is over?" he spat. Melanie tilted her head. "Oh, it's just beginning," she replied. "But don't worry. We won't touch your name. We'll only take the life you built with our silence." And with that, they stood, two women who had once been lied to, now leaving with what was rightfully theirs. Behind them, Jerome sat in his boxers, phone in hand, shaking, silent now, not from shock, but from understanding. He had gambled with women he thought were weak, but he'd forgotten that even water, given time, can split stone. The days that followed were not loud. They came in soft, biting silences, like harmattan mornings that peeled skin without warning. Jerome did not fight. He didn't scream or break into anyone's compound like a man desperate to reclaim his name. He simply vanished, first from the group chats where he used to send memes and brag about business ventures that barely existed. Then from his regular hangouts, the barber shop he used like a pulpit, and the cooperative office where he once walked like a small god with open tabs and open collars. Word spread, as it always does, not like fire but like oil, slow, slick, and impossible to clean. People began whispering that his car had been repossessed, that a lawyer served him papers in front of his mechanic, that Melanie had taken over their rental properties and installed a new sign outside the boutique, M.A. Holdings. Nobody knew exactly how it happened, but the smart ones pieced the puzzle together. Some said Jerome's wife used charm. Others blamed side chick Jazz. But the truth, cold and clean, was that two women, fed up with swallowing stones, had simply chosen to spit back. Pamela, meanwhile, returned to her old job at the hotel reception, not because she was desperate, but because she wanted something her hands could touch, something real that didn't smell of lies. Her colleagues noticed she had changed. Her laughter no longer came easily, but when it did, it was deep, heavy with meaning. One day, someone asked her if she was still seeing that rich man. She smiled faintly and said, "He used to be rich. Now he's just a man." Melanie had grown into something fuller, something untouchable, not the loud, chest-beating kind of strength that demands applause, but the sort that sits quietly and lets results speak. Her boutique became busier, not because of pity or gossip, but because she handled her work with the kind of precision that came from surviving storms. When customers walked in, they were met with calm music, clean counters, and a woman whose eyes had seen betrayal and chosen not to become it. She didn't talk about Jerome. Not in bitterness, not even in passing. He had become a season that passed, a broken tooth she no longer tongued. Even when their daughter asked one evening why Daddy wasn't sending cartoons anymore, she knelt and said, "Daddy is learning to become better. Let's pray for him." No malis. Just closure wrapped in grace. At night, when the children were asleep, Melanie would sit on her small balcony, sipping tea and flipping through her journal. She had started writing again, not poetry, not stories, just thoughts. On one page, she wrote, "Some men break homes. Others break the silence. Mine broke both. But I mended." Pamela visited often. They no longer spoke of Jerome. Instead, they talked about books, recipes, how to invest in stocks, and what it meant to forgive without inviting someone back to your table. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Melanie turned to Pamela and said, "We're not survivors. We're architects. We took what he tried to bury and built steps out of it." Pamela didn't answer. She simply nodded, her eyes glistening in a way that needed no language. Pain had introduced them, but wisdom had kept them walking forward. Jerome moved into a friend's flat in the outskirts of Ruoma, near the abandoned railway line. The house was small, 2 rooms and a corridor with cracked tiles and a fan that coughed more than it turned. He no longer dressed in fitted shirts or polished shoes. Now he wore faded tees and rubber slippers, the kind men wear when they no longer have anyone to impress. His phone rang less, and when it did, it was either a dead reminder or one of the few friends who hadn't ghosted him yet, calling not to help but to gossip. He started journaling too, not to be poetic, but to remember. to make sense of how the wind had turned against him so quickly. One night, he opened his old black notebook, the same one Pamela had passed to Melanie, and flipped through the pages. So many names, so many transactions, so many foolish assurances scrawled in his own hand. He stared at one page that simply read, "Control equals peace." He tore it out, not out of anger, but out of shame. Control had given him nothing but a slow fall. Sometimes he missed Pamela's laughter. Other times he remembered Melanie's silence, the kind that didn't beg for attention, but always said more than words could carry. The worst part wasn't that he lost them. It was knowing they had walked away with their heads high, while he sat wondering which part of his charm had stopped working. He never reached out. Pride stood like a fence, tall and stubborn. But deep down, Jerome knew he had met women who didn't just survive him. They outgrew him. Months passed. Rain came. Then sun. Then harmattan again. Life, as it does, moved on without asking permission. Melanie expanded her boutique, opening a second branch near the university. Pamela enrolled in a short course on financial literacy and started saving towards a modest shop of her own. They still met often, sometimes in silence, sometimes with laughter, but always with respect, the kind forged in shared scars. One evening, as they walked side by side along an empty road lined with almond trees, Pamela asked, "Do you ever think he'll try to come back?" Melanie looked up at the sky, where dusk was painting everything in soft blues and purples. "He already did," she said. "The day he lost everything, he came back to himself. And I'm not there anymore." They walked a little further. Pamela kicked a small stone and said, "I don't hate him, but I'll never love like that again." Melanie smiled. "Love isn't the problem. It's the lies that wear its clothes." They paused by a small kiosk and bought roasted corn, shared it without talking. Two women who had once been parts of the same man's story, now authors of their own. And in that quiet, smoky twilight, under a sky that asked nothing of them, they found something Jerome never had, peace that didn't depend on someone else's failure. Sometimes the betrayal that breaks you isn't just about love, it's about trust, dignity, and the silent rooms where you once folded yourself small to make someone else feel tall. This story is not just about two women outsmarting a man. It's about how clarity grows in quiet places. It's about rising from manipulation without needing to scream. To anyone listening who has been lied to, used, or underestimated, your silence is not weakness. Your kindness is not foolishness. And your intuition, that quiet nudge that something isn't right, must never be ignored. Love is not a performance. It doesn't need to hide, steal, or humiliate. When someone constantly asks you to shrink so they can shine, you're not in a relationship, you're in a shadow. If you ever find yourself asking, "Is it me?" remember this: the truth does not need hiding, and real love does not build itself on confusion. You deserve a love that is whole, not one split between secret rooms and broken promises. And if you ever loved someone who used your loyalty like a ladder, don't let that turn your heart to stone. Let it turn your wisdom into steel. The most powerful revenge isn't fire. It's success that doesn't denounce itself. It's peace that arrives without needing permission. Let them wonder. Let them hear your name and blink twice. But you move on. You grow. You rise. Quietly, gracefully, completely. Dear Lord, for every listener carrying the weight of betrayal, heal the places where trust once lived and now sits hollow. For the hearts that were manipulated, for the hands that gave freely and were met with deception, restore strength. Give us eyes to see beyond sweet words and ears that hear what silence is saying. Let no lie flourish where truth belongs. For the woman listening who is torn between letting go and holding on, give her peace that surpasses confusion. For the man whose loyalty was treated like a doormat, remind him that his worth is not based on who walked away. For every person walking out of a storm they didn't cause, Lord, dry their tears, and plant new laughter in their chest. Grant us the grace to forgive without reopening doors you have closed. Teach us that love is not pain in disguise, and peace is not earned through performance. Surround us with people who sharpen us, not those who silence us. Restore everything stolen by deceit, time, joy, self-esteem, clarity. Rebuild our lives on wisdom, not regret. And for those who once lied, used, or manipulated, let conviction find them, not shame. Let them grow. Let them change. Let them feel what it means to be truly accountable. Because growth isn't just for the brokenhearted, it's for the breakers too. Father, give us strength to walk away when our worth is not honored. Give us healing that doesn't beg for closure. And give us futures that make us grateful we didn't settle for crumbs when you had a feast prepared. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.